Another bloody terrorist attack. 24 people are dead, including the gunman. And the U.S. issues arrest warrants for the Pan Am hijackers.
NBC Nightly News, reported by Connie Chung.
Good evening. 2 Arab terrorists burst into a synagogue today in Istanbul, Turkey, spraying submachine gun fire and explosions. 24 people are dead, including the 2 gunmen, 4 wounded. Stan Bernard has more on the story.
The largest synagogue in Istanbul was turned into a slaughterhouse by terrorists using automatic weapons and grenades. The carnage was spread throughout the temple as those who came to pray instead tried to flee the onslaught. About 30 worshippers had gathered for the Sabbath morning service when 2 men shouting slogans in Arabic opened fire with automatic weapons. One police official said the attackers tried to flee but were turned back at the front door by police responding to the sounds of gunfire. Then 2 explosions were heard, apparently from 2 grenades. Police theorized the 2 terrorists may have taken their own lives. 2 Czechoslovakian-made automatic weapons were found, along with 7 unexploded grenades. A security source here said the grenades were the same type found on 2 Libyans charged with plotting an attack on the American club in Ankara last April. So far, 3 Arab terror organizations have claimed responsibility for the massacre. The Turkish Prime Minister called a cabinet meeting and said this looked like the work of a suicide squad. He linked the attack on the Pan Am jet in Karachi to the attack in Istanbul today. And in Israel, the Prime Minister also tied the 2 attacks together.
Well, they're behaving like wild animals. Again, yesterday in Karachi and today in Istanbul, there was a terrible demonstration of the danger, the cruelty, of the cowardness of this terroristic organization.
The Jewish community in the city of 5.5 million is a mere 25,000. Tonight, 4 of them are in this hospital and 22 victims are being mourned. In a city where security is always tight, today the government ordered that security increased. Stan Bernard, NBC News, Istanbul.
The United States today issued arrest warrants for the hijackers of the Pan Am jet in Karachi, Pakistan. A Justice Department spokesman said the murder charges are just protective to prevent the terrorist release. The U.S. is confident the Pakistanis will prosecute them. In Karachi, a Pakistani official said 4 American military planes with hijack specialists on board were on their way to Karachi before the terrorists opened fire. The U.S. would not comment on that. What emerged today was admission by the Pakistanis that they were not prepared to rescue the hostages. Keith Miller reports.
Investigators searched the Pan Am jumbo jet this morning looking for clues to help them reconstruct the tragic end to the hijacking. What couldn't be missed was the evidence of bloodshed and panic as hundreds of people ran for their lives, and they had to do it on their own. Pakistani officials admitted today they played no part in the release of the hostages, and that their anti-terrorist troops were not prepared to act once the hijackers opened fire. The terrorists apparently panicked when the plane's auxiliary power unit went out, cutting off the lights. It was apparently the Pan Am crew that averted a massacre by releasing emergency chutes so the hostages could get out. One of the first passengers off the plane rushed to Pakistan's chief of civil aviation, pleading for help.
And he said, they have started killing everybody indiscriminately. For God's sake, do something. And they're right here, and this is exactly what he's saying. And more people were streaming down. I rushed to the nearest post, and through the megaphone we said, where are our people? Where are the commandos? They must come out.
But they didn't, not right away. It took 15 minutes for them to reach the plane, and by then the lucky ones had already escaped. The government also revised the status of the 4 hijackers, saying only 1 was killed, and that 3 terrorists are in custody, 1 of them wounded. An interpreter used during the negotiations with the hijackers identified them as Palestinians.
A Palestinian, positively.
Lists of the survivors and where they could be found were posted in the city's major hotels. There was relief and concern.
Don't worry.
The U.S. Air Force provided a medical evacuation plane for some 20 patients requiring specialized treatment. They were put aboard the flight to a military hospital in West Germany.
50 feet down here are American military doctors and nurses who will take a look at you quickly. 100 feet beyond is the airplane.
So far, only the Indian government, whose citizens have suffered the greatest number of casualties, have criticized the Pakistanis' handling of the hijack. The government has suspended several airport security officials pending an investigation into how the terrorists got onto the tarmac and into the plane. But the Pakistani government is not about to apologize for the attack taking place here, saying nothing can stop a determined, fanatic group of terrorists from attacking unarmed civilians in a public place. Keith Miller, NBC News, Karachi.
Moscow today condemned the hijacking and called for international action to prevent terrorism. An official statement from TASS declares there is no justification for such a crime. In the past, the Kremlin has remained silent about acts of terrorism directed at Americans. Today's statement did not mention that the hijacking involved an American plane. Coming up, the American reporter held in a Soviet prison may go on trial. Marvin Kalb will have more on that and U.S.-Soviet relations. Robert Litzide on the young man without a league, but lots of money. Doug Flutie. And Dennis Murphy on the gondolier who's lost his way from Venice. President Reagan has sent a private message to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev urging the release of U.S. News and World Report correspondent Nicholas Daniloff. Mr. Reagan warned that Daniloff's continued detention could harm U.S.-Soviet relations. He assured Gorbachev Daniloff is not a spy. Chief diplomatic correspondent Marvin Kalb reports on how that detention may take its toll on U.S.-Soviet relations.
At the top of the agenda for the second straight day, arms control, as negotiators for the United States and the Soviet Union met at the State Department to prepare for a projected summit meeting at the end of this year.
Sir, did you make any progress?
Not yet.
Did you have a Mr. Daniloff at all?
The Soviet diplomat walked right past the question, which is increasingly seen as a potential obstacle on the path to a summit. Glancingly yesterday, the U.S. side raised the Daniloff question, only to have it dismissed by the Soviet side. In Moscow today, American reporter Nicholas Daniloff spent his 8th day at Lefortovo prison undergoing daily interrogation, accused of espionage. His wife, Ruth, talked to him on the telephone for 15 minutes, told him about a proposed exchange, Daniloff for an accused Soviet spy in New York.
And he said, well, I caught a whiff of that, and it was so fuzzy, you know, that it was passed off. But the main suggestion that he is getting from them is that the investigation will continue, there will be a trial, there will be a sentence, and then maybe he will serve his sentence in the Soviet Union, or maybe he will be let go to the United States.
Mrs. Daniloff said her husband had high blood pressure, and she described him as sounding very nervous and tense. U.S. officials say the longer Daniloff stays in prison, the greater the odds that the U.S. will take retaliatory action. A scheduled U.S.-Soviet dialogue, an outgrowth of this one at the Chautauqua Institution last year, is supposed to begin next weekend in the Soviet Union. A high-level U.S. delegation, including journalists and White House and State Department officials, is under increasing pressure to pull out. And if it does, and a decision is expected on this within 3 days, this year's dialogue will be at a minimum postponed. An unraveling of the U.S.-Soviet relationship so carefully nurtured in anticipation of a summit might then begin. U.S. officials still hope that before they are forced to act, the Russians will release Daniloff. At this point, it is only a slim hope. Marvin Kalb, NBC News, the State Department.
The Soviet Union says the captains of 2 Soviet ships that collided in the Black Sea are guilty of criminal negligence. 166 people are confirmed dead, and 282 others apparently entombed in the cabins of the passenger ship that sank after colliding with a freighter. Today, Soviet television showed pictures of the rescue operation. The Admiral Nakhimov had more than 1,200 people on board. It went down so quickly there was not time to lower lifeboats. Officials say the captains spoke to each other by radio and were warned their ships were close to each other but didn't do enough to prevent the accident last Sunday. Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping is offering to meet in Moscow with Mikhail Gorbachev if certain conditions are met. The most important, that the Soviets stop supporting Vietnam's occupation of Cambodia. This is the first time since Chinese-Soviet relations cooled a quarter century ago that a Chinese leader has said he's willing to travel to the Soviet Union for a summit. Officials in Kansas City today dedicated the nation's latest memorial to the veterans of Vietnam. As James McCullough reports, construction of the memorial was spurred by public outrage over an attack by a vandal 6 months ago.
In Kansas City, Vietnam veterans and their families were calling this memorial a bridge toward healing.
I pronounce you husband and wife.
For others, it was the bonding of love.
I pledged when I went to Vietnam to give my life to my country. I'm giving her the same pledge. I would give my life to her.
Mainly, it was a time to remember those who died.
Robert W. Bates, Donald Wayne Bean, Dean Allen Bell.
385 names are inscribed on the wall. Norma Manning lost her son Patrick. His name, now etched in stone, is a painful reminder of an era his mother still tries to understand.
He was too young to die. Too young, 19 years old.
Unlike the Vietnam Veterans Wall in Washington, D.C., or the parades in New York and Chicago, the memorial here has been the focus of some unwelcome memories. Last March, the wall was vandalized, the work of one man who painted a number of political slogans, one of them attacking the memorial.
The part here, it said Sucker Memorial, is probably what got me. I've got friends that died in Vietnam that are on this wall.
Fearing another attack on the wall, veterans kept nightly vigils. Last night was their last. Today, veterans felt a sense of accomplishment, that after 3 years, their wall was finally built. A place of honor, and not what a vandal tried to label as a place of shame. James McCullough, NBC News, Kansas City.
The so-called Walker family spy ring may have provided the Soviets with even greater information than has been believed. The New York Times reports that confessed spy John Walker failed to pass recent lie detector tests, leading prosecutors to believe that he may have lied about the beginnings of his spy career. It is feared that John's brother, Arthur Walker, began the spy ring while still a lieutenant commander in the Navy, with access to secrets about the U.S. submarine fleet. Barbra Streisand vowed that she would never sing in public again, but this year's battle for control of the Senate has made her change her mind. As Ken Bodie reports, she will appear in concert tonight at her California ranch to raise money for Democratic candidates.
It's only just out of reach, down the block on the beach.
$5,000 a couple to hear the Streisand concert. This was last night's dress rehearsal. The $1 million that Barbra Streisand raises tonight will be divided among 6 Democratic Senate candidates.
Senator Alan Cranston.
Some of the money will stay in California for veteran Alan Cranston, who faces Republican Ed Schau.
And hey, everybody, vote for Schau.
Without Barbra Streisand's voice, Schau still rates a chance to win. Republicans, here in blue, are defending 22 Senate seats this year. 6 Republicans are in deep trouble, 6 more in some trouble. Of the 12 Democratic seats up, only 3 are in real jeopardy. 2 more could be in trouble. Haley Barbour watches Senate races for the White House.
If we lose the Senate, we lose a tremendously important tool. It would be very, very difficult for us to get things done. We may be relegated to playing defense for 2 years.
To prevent that, the president has already made 16 Senate campaign trips. He's raised over $10 million nationwide. Republicans are trying to Reaganize this election.
Ronald Reagan's name will never be on the ballot again. But on November the 4th, everybody in this country who likes the job he's done is going to have a chance to vote for Ronald Reagan.
And count my calories, count my votes, and count my blessings.
In Maryland, the strong frontrunner in this Tuesday's Democratic primary is Barbara Mikulski. She thinks the president may have deep pockets, but doubts he has coattails.
Well, I think what will happen is the president will come into Maryland. They will give him a warm welcome and turn around and vote for Barbara Mikulski.
It is so close that he doesn't know, nor does anyone else. The race for control of the Senate is so close, it could wind up dead even. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, which would keep Vice President George Bush close to home to cast the tie-breaking vote. Ken Bodie, NBC News, Washington.
A new study shows a staggering rate of recidivism for convicts released from California prisons. A Rand Corporation study for the Justice Department says that 76% of them are back behind bars within 3 years. The rates were also shockingly high in 2 other states, 60% in Texas and 53% in Michigan.